Okay, welcome back to the channel. I guess that's more for me than for you guys. But hey, I'm making an update on a video I did a while back, and I'm talking about years back. It was a looping factory, and the main focus was a conveyor belt system in geometry nodes. At the time, geometry nodes was still in the early stages of its development. Well, that being said, after like a month or four, I believe, there was a huge update in geometry nodes. They shifted from a more attribute-based, still there are still attributes I know, but to a more field-based, I think. And there was overall a huge update on geometry nodes. So with that came a lot of requests for me to do an update on this. So I'm just gonna go ahead and dive right in. In Blender, I have already prepared a little setup for my factory. It's a factory for Stroopwafels, which is located in Gouda, which is a city in the Netherlands. First, I'm gonna start with creating a conveyor belt loop. So we're gonna create a curve. It doesn't really matter how you do it, but I like to do it this way. So I'm gonna create a curve and a circle curve, which we can place wherever we want. So I place it here where I can see it nicely. Rotate it on the, I'm gonna go into edit mode, and then I'm gonna rotate it on the x-axis on 90 degrees. Get both of these, I get both of these handles, so the top and bottom, scale them over the z-axis. I think right about there. Then I go to the other points and also scale those in. If they don't work, that means that the handles are set to something that isn't allowing you to scale them. So for example, the automatic, I believe. So if you choose either free or aligned, they should now scale. If you choose free, for example, you can, or they're broken, the handles are broken, so you can individually as well change the direction. Just a side note, doesn't really matter in this case, but we just needed them to be able to, we just needed it to be able to scale down. And slow but steady, here, same problem. So I changed to align this time, and over the x-axis, I need to have something that is flat but rounded at the corners. So about there should do the trick. You can always refine this. It's gonna be a non-destructive approach. And go to the top here and say geometry nodes. With our curve selected, we're gonna create a new geometry node. First, this part is probably something you already know, but we need it anyway. So we're gonna create a instancing system. They instance it around the curve in a consistent manner. So that's the key. So they need to be spaced evenly. Normally it does it already, but you don't need to have to distribute on points node, because that actually allows it to be random. Anyway, we need a shape that is our instance. In this case, I'm gonna create a cube. I even wrote it with W's. So our cube can be whatever size you think it should be, but I'm gonna create something that resembles the input that I need. We have 4 points, which are also represent now 4 cubes that we scaled in our desired dimensions. So what we can do now is create a resample curve node. What this will do is just get the general curve that we have. It will recreate that curve and distribute new points on that curve. So if we place it in between here, you can see that the count is set to 2, and by just by magic, it appears to have 10 points now. So we can change the slider to whatever we think is necessary for a belt. That depends on the length of the curve. So if we say 50, for example, we can see that that's close to what we need. For now, I'm gonna do slightly lower, so 45, maybe even lower, 40. Okay, that seems about right. This is the easy part, the distributing of the instances over the curve. It's quite easy to do, and we have full control over our curve and our instances, and that is perfect. But what we don't have is a way to animate that. We don't have a clear way to animate it over the same curve. I think at the center of this idea is the sample curve node. We just had a resample curve node that just creates the instances or the amount of instances we need. The sample curve node does exactly what it says it will do. It takes a sample from the curve. So somewhere along the curve, let me just show what it does. So what determines where you are on the curve is the factor. So 0 is the start point, 1 is the end point. with a set 1.5 should be right in the center. So if we create a set position node, just to illustrate what it does, cube right here, grab our curve again into the curve sample node, and we have we can choose what we sample. So from that specific location, so the 0 to 1, we can now say we want to use the position, which makes most sense. You can also use the tangent or the normal for that specific location. That's perfect because we need those later as well. But for now, just to illustrate, I'm going to grab the position and place it into the offset. And it holds that position. The way you can animate this now is by introducing a change in the vector. So that is perfect because that is the basis of what we need. So we saw how this will work with one cube already. We need all our cubes to move in a consistent speed around the loop. How we're going to do that is we need to capture our points, our existing points. So the 50 or the 40, sorry, the 40 cubes we have already. We need to capture that position. So let me go back to what we had before. How we are going to do that is by using a capture attribute node. And the capture attribute node can be set right after the sample curve node. What we're going to capture is indeed in the domain points. So the points represent the cubes. We want to capture those points. We told it it's the domain we want to capture, but now we need to actually tell it where the points are. And the points are on the spline. So for that, we are going to use a spline parameter node. Sorry, I dragged this out. Doesn't do that. Okay, doesn't want to do that. So I'm going to do a shift A, sorry, for adding, and search for spline parameter node. Spline parameter, and there you go. And in this case, we need the factor. Again, the factor goes from 0 to 1, which is the start point, to the end point. In our case, it's a cyclic curve, which means the start and end value are the same. So now what we need to do is we need to connect that capture to the sample curve node. And now if we go and use a set position node right after the instances on point, and use the position in the position this time, it doesn't do anything. That makes sense because we haven't told it, we just looped the geometry through it. So we told it we're going to use this curve, but we don't actually have told it that we want to use the points of the curve. That's what the factor of the capture node does. So you have to grab that factor and you have to plug it inside of the factor, of course. The factor goes into the factor. Now all of our cubes appear, and that is what we want. Still it moves still it moves as one block. I know I said that it wouldn't, but we're getting there. So each point on the curve has a unique location. We're going to use that location to drive the movement, but to actually create movement we want to use the scene time. So add a new node, search for scene time. In this case, we're going to use the seconds. What I like to do in this case, for example, use a math node, set it to multiply, so we can search for multiply, and go and 0.1. This is just a way to slow down or increase the speed of your loop. Like I said before, we want to add the position of the points along the curve to the scene time. So that creates our movement. How is that going to look? We create another math node, get our seconds in there. So for example, we create a connection between here. There we get our factor right here, disconnected from the factor in the sample curve node because we're going to reroute it through our add node. So you need to connect the add node to the factor, and that factor determines where the points are again in the loop of our curve. Now if we press play, you can see that they move, and that is exactly what we want. However, you see that they keep piling up at some point. They accumulate at the start point. And why that is because of the following thing. For example, like I explained before, you add the value of the scaled seconds to the position of each point. Say point 0 is the start point, and with second 1, it goes 0 plus 0.1. Second 2, it goes 0 plus 2. Second 3, you get the gist. Second 10, we have 0 plus 1, meaning it goes back to the start because our vector runs from 0 to 1. What happens when they go beyond 1? Well, it just clips. There's nothing happening there. So what we need to do instead is we need to introduce a fraction node. What the fraction node does, let me just show you that it works, because I feel like that works better. You can duplicate the add node, set it to fraction. It's in the rounding section, and place it in between there. So what the fraction node does is it removes the integer of the value. So if you input this value into the fraction node, so for example 0.5, what it will put out is 0.5. If you put in 0.75, it will put out 0.75. Now, the crux here is if you put in, say, 3.5, it will drop the integer 3, and you are left with 0.5. Sorry, I was just trying to remember what I said. So you are left with 0.5. Now, that is a value on the vector scale we have from 0 to 1. This creates a seamless looping position change of each point on that curve. It is not aligned, and that quite bugs me because I like it to be as smooth as possible, and you like that too. I know you. So how we're going to do that is we need to align it, and like I said before, it is good that we have this sample curve node because that gets the location for us, the position on that curve, like I said before, and it gets it for all the points, all those 40 points we have, it gets the position. But it also gets the tangent and the normal, and those two we can use to align it to our spline. And we need our align rotation to vector because the other one is not in use anymore, which is basically the same node. There are just some minor changes. Okay, we can use the tangent or the normal, and we have to see what works best, but I think it's gonna be the tangent. How I determine what I need to do is I'm gonna use the instance on point nodes for this. So take a look at what happens to our cubes, our points right there. And specifically, I want this corner, of course, to be angled in the right direction. So I'm gonna search one by one which angle it is. So it's not the X, it is the Y. The Z does the other way. We need to rotate over the Y axis, and we need to align. So for example, let's say that is okay. No. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm looking for the way it's scaling. So that's the point. Let me rephrase that. I'm looking for the axis where it scales up and down because that is the direction I want to point outward, right? And in this case, it was the, what was it? The Z. So the Z is outwards and the Y rotation is our pivot point. So with that knowledge, we can now go ahead and set this to input our tangent into the vector. We want to align the z-axis, and we want to do that by rotating over the y-axis. So if we do that now and place it into the socket right here, I aligned the z-axis to the tangent, and it should have been the normal. Like I said, I was looking for the way it moved outwards, which is the normal direction. And somehow I didn't think to use the normal as the alignment method for the axis that we just figured out we needed to do. That brings me to our last thing that I want to show you about the conveyor belt. The conveyor belt now moves in that direction, and I want it to move into the direction of the great gear looking thing right here. Of course, you can just rotate it 180 degrees on the z-axis, which works fine, but there is a thing you can do in the geometry nodes as well, which is search for reverse curve, place it in between there, and there you have it. And somehow reversing it like that broke the normal. If I reverse it, you see that I don't need this, but I needed to tilt it. I don't know why, but something in the operation of reversing the curve made me have to switch it, and well, that works. So It's fine. Well, the conveyor belt for me is just gonna be a modular approach. I'm gonna create a conveyor belt loop, and that loop I'm gonna spawn across another curve, which is going to be the whole line, the whole production line. I'm not gonna create one continuous loop. I got a setup for that as well. I'm gonna show you that in the end. It's not fully up to what I want it to be, but it's working, and there are some minor caveats that you should know about. What I like to do is from the place right here where our conveyor belt is located, placing the 3D cursor at that location too by pressing Shift S and say cursor to selected. Now what I want to do is I want to create a new plane, and why I'm going to do that, this is basically the same as in the previous one. It's just a preferred method. I'm going to collapse all of it at the center, so we have now one point, and drag that point out on the x-axis somewhere here, extrude it down, I don't know why, here maybe, then go down in the z-axis somewhere around there, again over the x-axis, and then extrude one more time, so we have this line. Belt system right here is create a array modifier, and that array modifier is going to be our duplication system for the conveyor belts, which makes sense. Add a curve modifier and select our conveyor belt array curve. Doesn't work because it's not actually a curve. I want to duplicate it just so we have it as a mesh as well. Convert to curve, there you go. Now it is a curve. And now we can select our, and now we get our pick whip tool here, our eyedropper, and select in the outliner right our curve, and it deforms to the curve. That's what we wanted. Now we can change our amount. For now I think 4 is fine. Move it over the x-axis. There's one problem with this. If I play, you can see that they start to jitter. What this is doing is the array modifier looks at the bounding box of the whole conveyor belt and then positions that right after the following one, or the previous one in the array modifier, right? So you have 1, you have 2, and they have a varying scale because of the loop that is going around. So there's some point where the loop is slightly bigger because there's a point where it pivots slightly farther beyond the edge of the loop, and that point creates a different size of the bounding box. So the bounding box is the cube around of the conveyor belt. It's an invisible thing, but it's just what is used in the array modifier to set a relative offset. And that is exactly the problem. We don't need a relative offset, we need a constant offset. This means that we have to introduce the offset by hand. That's not a biggie. We just have to say, instead of relative offset, we need a constant offset. Now they are not moving, they are intersecting though, but that's an easy fix, of course. We just need to move the slider to whatever size we think is all right, to whatever size we think is needed. And that is our conveyor belt line, whatever you call that, I don't know. I have kept the existing mesh here, and that's perfect, because what I want to do is call this production line. Geometry node setup is actually quite similar to what we have created with the conveyor belt system. So we can go ahead and we can go over to that system, select our geometry nodes right there. Let me make it a bit bigger. Let's see, we can grab all of it for now. Go back to our production line and paste that in right here. I don't need the base curve because we already have one. Sorry, I can keep that, but I remove the other one. This is not a curve, so we need to use the mesh to curve node. Put it in here. The output node can be right at the end, of course. Remove that line. This creates a line with I don't know how many, like 35 cubes on it. Is moving in the same direction as our conveyor belt system. So you see where we are going with this. The only thing is it's not aligned properly. So what we're going to do now is create a set position node, place it right after the input, and then use a viewer node just so we can see what we're doing. And let's move it up on the Y direction. Sorry, that's not the. Let's move it up on the Z direction. Something like that, and move it over the X direction, like so. I'm gonna use a cylinder, and that cylinder is gonna be our instance. Scale it down quite a bit. There are way too many. Okay, so let's go down to say 10. Okay, that's more like it. What happens now is something quite funny actually. Because we are using a resample node, the curve is trying its best to conform to the existing one while resampling and redistributing the points along that new curve. So let me visualize that for you. Let's see, this is our existing curve. And this is our resampled curve. And you see that the tangent is slightly off here, or the angle is slightly off here. And also the point where it's going up is slightly off. So it's just all in all, not perfect. What I'm gonna do is, let's bring back our sampled curve and create some more points on it. So something that is quite aligned to what you need. 25 seems to do it. There's a slight bend here, so I can go even higher. But I think 25 is a nice number to work with. Just try to have some amount that has enough points that you can recreate your curve. For now, we have too much on the belt, for my taste at least. So what I'm gonna do is create a selection. You can go ahead, if you don't understand this, I created a whole video about this principle. I'll link it up top if you need to have some further information, or if you need some further explanation about this. But for now, I'm gonna just set it up quite rapid. We need an index node, a math node, and a compare node. There you go. Set the add node to floored modulo. It can also be the other one, but I like this one. And create a, say, 2. So that's going to select every second instance of the points. Or you can go ahead and say 4. Also, one thing that is quite handy to know is I have set my timeline, where is it, to 25 seconds. And if you don't have that on 25 seconds, but on 24, for example, you can see that now. Here we go, we're almost at the end. And it jumps. And it jumps because, so each second our point moves by 0.1. And that is the perfect amount for us, because in 10 seconds, that is 1. The instance or the point is back to its original position. 10 seconds is of course 25 frames, so that's why my timeline is 25 frames long, and that creates a perfect loop. And setting it to 24 creates an offset in that loop. So keep that in mind, it's just a minor thing, but you need to recalculate what works for you then. I feel like they're moving quite fast, so you can also slow them down a bit. And as long as you move in like increments, or maybe I should say divide them by 2, your speed, you're good. You're not breaking the loop. So if I go 0.05, you see that the speed matches more with the speed of the belt. And there you go. And it still loops. What I want to do now is one last thing. I want to go ahead and create another cylinder. Let's set this to a brown color. That's going to be the color of our Stroopwafels. So one cylinder has that color. And let's create another cylinder and make that a bit higher. Another cylinder. Make that a bit higher, like that. And then we need to set that position a bit higher. Set position. There you go. Okay, so these are going to be our instances. And geometry, no. Delete geometry, separate geometry. Geometry to instances node. And now we can combine the two, place that in our instances instead, right, like this. And now what I want to do is create an offset in our height, so that could be, let's delete this one and make sure that it is touching the belt as closely as we can, so like so. Bring back the other instance. You don't see it now because they're overlapping. But if I make this one a bit smaller, for example, you would see it. There you go. We could also try some different materials. Another one here. If I go back to the shading and say I have a different material, so this one is called material, let's call it Stroopwafel. Stroopwafel, yeah. Go to slot number 2 and use the same one, waffle, yeah. Then make a unique version of it. Create this a bit brighter, less saturated, more yellowy, like so. Like a bit more raw, dough. Okay, this is just an indication, right? It's not the actual shader, so don't worry about that. And waffle raw, there you go. So we have two different instances. So the last part is going to be switching from the raw dough to the Stroopwafel, which is just something I need for my case. It might be helpful for you as well. You can also just have one segment hiding by creating a cube or some object that is on top of where two lines meet, two curves meet, which is one curve for your A and one curve for your B. They just are two separate lines that just loop individually from each other. That's also no solution. I'm going to create a solution that is based on a selection method. For that selection method, create a cube. Get that cube, and we're going to use a transform node, a combination of the transform node and the cube itself. So let's visualize. I want to cut it off right at this point, so I need to scale it on the x-axis to make it a bit bigger, and we can move it here. It is encompassing it right now. Maybe grow it a bit on the z-axis as well, and move it down slightly, like so. So that is our cube now placed. We're going to use that as a recast target geometry. We need our position of the points, our source position, that is, and we already have that right here. We already have that right here, which is our position that is going here in the offset, so I can reroute it like so, for example. There you go, reroute that and place that into the source position. Then we should be able to use the isHit from the raycast node in the instance index of the instances on point node. And now you can see that, let me go back to this one, create a, let's see if we can do that, create a join geometry node. So here's our cube. Let's say delete geometry and only faces. There you go. So now we have created a bounding box for us to see. So at the point where the cube is, and we can move it as well, you see right now this creates our selection. So this is the point where I want it, maybe even a bit further back. It doesn't really matter, you can play with that. But that is the selection we needed. And if it now moves, you can see that at that point where it meets the cube, or where it's fully in the cube, I don't know exactly, when the origin is inside of the cube, you see that it switches. Okay, so I almost forgot to do this. So we're going to look at the continuous conveyor belt. Don't know if that makes sense, but it's it is based on a single curve. It isn't fully up to what I want it to be because it breaks if you do a certain rotation, but I'll show you that in a second. I'm not going to go through the entire thing in the same length as I did before. because this is something I already talked about in other videos, and the principles are quite easy here. So let's just dive right in. Over here in the geometry nodes, you can ignore the bits below. I was gonna hide it with my hand, but you can ignore the bits below here for just a second. The important part is, of course, this is optional, but you know that. You feed your base curve through a duplicate elements, and the output of that you offset a certain amount. So, and the amount is for the positive and the negative. So I'll circle back to that later, but it will make sense. So what you get, so let me enable this. I now have a loop, you see, and it works quite well. So what I've done here, and this is something you already know if you follow me and have seen other videos, but I have a video on the ultimate curve tool, and in the tool I explain about capping the curve and creating a cap for that, aligning it to the curve, and that's just basically the same principle, only it's not a sphere that we are capping on the curve, but we are now using a half circle and we place it on the end of the line. It's the same principle, also the same principle of aligning. So if you watch that video, I will link here as well. You can see how that aligning process goes. But the main thing here is that the circle is the same radius as we have the offset of our two lines. So for example, here it is 0.1 up and 0.1 down. So our radius should be 0.1. So the diameter is 0.2, of course, and that creates this line. So if I disable the instances on point nodes, which are the end caps of our line, you can see that there are just two spheres that are There are two lines or curves that are duplicated and offset from each other, right? And that is what these two are doing. So a duplicate elements node, you can see the top one moves, and with this one the lower one moves, and I join those together right here. Let me reintroduce the end caps. Then I move and say curve to mesh, merge those by distance, and then again merge, mesh to curve, because we need a curve for the second part. The second part is basically the same thing we did before. All of this is the same. I've just copied that and changed the what is it here? Let me see. So here it is, a curve, a spiral curve, and in our setup right here it is just the group input. That's the only difference. Okay, there are too many points because I already had something created. So if you see, I can extrude this, and this looks perfect actually. The problem is when I do this, let's not play it while I do this. The endpoint, if I rotate it on the what is this axis? The y-axis, I think. It breaks the curve, and it kind of makes sense, of course. So let me go here, select this curve. If I rotate it on the y-axis, you see that, of course, these 2 points, the endpoint of the half circle and the endpoint of the top line and the bottom line don't end up. So the merge by distance isn't merging them because the distance is too big. And if you increase the distance, well, of course, you have very unreliable results because it can also merge different points that you don't want to be merged. Of course, we create two duplicates and they are offset, and the alignment of the sphere or the half circles is to the curve in between. So the bending would also affect the length of the curve, but it doesn't do that because it's only displacing it in the y direction. I know that is what the problem is. I don't know how to fix it. So if you know how to fix this, you can reach out either by using this email address. You go to Instagram, you can go to the Discord server. There are many places where we can talk all together and yeah, find a solution for this. If you are interested, of course. If you don't want this, you can just ignore it. Fine. I hope that was kind of helpful. This part, but also the entire video. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed that video. You learned something, and if you did, create something creative with this. I know that I'm gonna try to do that, and you'll see the results post it on my Instagram as I have finished them. If you'd like to follow that, you know where the link is. Without further ado, let's stay creative. I'll see you next time. Ciao.